It's 6:00 a.m. on the 8th of December, 1941, and Captain Homer Wallin stands on the shattered edge of the dry docks looking out over Pearl Harbor. The water is choked with thick black crude. Fires still burn across the harbor basin, sending greasy columns of smoke rolling into the Hawaiian sky. Below that blackened surface lies the pride of the United States Navy. 8 battleships, torn apart by torpedoes, shattered by armor-piercing bombs, resting in the harbor mud or burning down to their waterlines. The world believes the American battle fleet is dead. In Tokyo, military planners celebrate the total destruction of American naval power in the Pacific. In Washington, politicians speak of catastrophic disaster. But standing at the edge of the burning water, Wallin looks at the twisted steel and sees something else. An impossible mission. His orders are absolute. Reach into the oily depths. Execute what will become the largest maritime salvage operation in history. Raise the sunken giants from the harbor floor and send them back to destroy the empire that put them there. The scale of the disaster is staggering. The battleship California is submerged up to her superstructure, her massive hull resting in 40 feet of mud and water. The West Virginia is torn open by 7 torpedoes, settled straight into the harbor floor alongside Ford Island, at the heart of what the world would come to call Battleship Row. The Nevada lies deliberately grounded at Hospital Point, her forward decks flooded and burned out. The Pennsylvania sits battered in dry dock number 1, while the destroyers Kassan and Downs lie crumpled together in a mass of incinerated wreckage. Over 2,400 Americans are dead. More than 200,000 tons of the most powerful warships in the world are resting in the sludge. To naval engineers across the globe, it is an open and shut case. Ships sunk to their main decks in war zones do not return. The standard procedure is simple. Strip what you can, blast the hulks to clear the shipping channel, and write them off as scrap. Wallin rejects the standard procedure entirely. He gathers a specialized salvage force composed of civilian shipbuilders, Navy divers, and salvage engineers. Among the key civilian contractors is Pacific Bridge Company, whose experienced marine construction crews will prove critical to engineering solutions that simply do not exist in any naval manual. The Navy places Wallin in charge of the salvage section of the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, with the full weight of Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, behind the operation. There is no manual for this. No fleet in human history has ever attempted to pull an entire sunken battle line out of the ocean under wartime conditions. The Japanese are sweeping across the Pacific, conquering the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. Time is running out. If the Pearl Harbor salvage operation fails, the United States will fight a 2-ocean war without the heavy guns needed to support amphibious invasions. The work begins not with heavy machinery, but in total darkness. Deep beneath the surface, Navy divers plunge into the contaminated water. The surface of Pearl Harbor is covered in a foot-thick blanket of toxic bunker fuel that burns their eyes and rots their rubber dive suits. Below that sludge layer, visibility is zero. The divers must work entirely by touch, feeling their way along torn armor plates and jagged steel bulkheads. Inside the sunken hulls, the conditions are nightmare fuel. Decaying food, rotting cargo, and the bodies of fallen sailors float through drowned passageways. Pockets of deadly hydrogen sulfide gas gather in sealed air pockets, ready to kill a diver the moment a helmet seal is compromised. By the time the operation is complete, Navy divers will have logged over 20,000 hours underwater in these conditions. A staggering human cost measured not in deaths, but in sheer endurance. Diver First Class. Edward Raymer steps off the salvage tender and descends into the pitch black of the West Virginia. His lead-weighted boots sink into the harbor mud. He reaches out blindly, his heavy canvas gloves sliding along the cold, slimy hull until his fingers trace a massive, jagged rupture. 7 Japanese Type 91 torpedoes have ripped a hole over 100 feet long through the side of the battleship. The structural frames are crushed inward like tin foil. To seal an opening that large under 40 feet of water requires engineering that has never been tested. The salvage teams invent techniques on the fly. They construct massive wooden patches known as cofferdams. These are gigantic wooden boxes, reinforced with heavy steel beams, custom built to match the unique curvature of each battleship's shattered hull. Workers lower these multi-ton wooden caissons into the water, while divers work in absolute darkness to align them against the steel plates. Once in position, divers pack the seams with horsehair, oakum, and quick-setting cement. If a single cable snaps or a seam fails, the immense water pressure will crush the cofferdam instantly, killing anyone working inside. First up is the USS Nevada. The only battleship to get underway during the attack, she had taken repeated bomb hits and was run aground to prevent her from sinking in the main channel. But resting on the hard coral bottom, her hull has sustained catastrophic strain. Salvage teams work around the clock, patching holes with steel plates and pumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of toxic water from her lower compartments. By February 12, 1942, just 2 months after the attack, the pumps roar to life. The water level inside begins to drop. Inch by inch, the massive 29,000-ton hull begins to lift out of the coral bed. Tugboats strain against their tow lines. The Nevada breaks free from the bottom and floats under her own power into dry dock. The miracle at Pearl Harbor has begun. Inside the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, thousands of civilian mechanics, welders, and machinists take over where the divers left off. They work 24 hours a day in blistering tropical heat. Shifts blur together. Machine shops operate without pause, forging replacement parts from raw steel and cannibalizing undamaged equipment from shattered destroyers. The Nevada's internal machinery is caked in salt, mud, and corrosive oil. Workers tear down her steam turbines piece by piece, boiling the components in chemical baths, scraping away rust by hand, and rewiring miles of ruined electrical conduits. Next comes the USS California. Torpedoed twice and flooded by open inspection hatches, she's been sitting upright in 40 feet of mud for months. The biological decay inside her sealed compartments has created pockets of lethal gas so concentrated that salvage workers must wear chemical respirators inside the hull. Cofferdams are bolted to her sides, forming a temporary wall that rises above the water level. On March 24, 1942, 10 massive salvage pumps begin drafting water from her flooded interior at a rate of thousands of gallons per minute. The battleship groans as the mud suction releases its grip. With a sudden surge, the California rises from the harbor floor, floating for the first time in over 3 months. The damage is immense, but the salvage crews do not just repair the ships. They rebuild them into entirely new weapons of war. As each raised battleship enters dry dock, naval architects begin radical modernizations. The obsolete cage masts that had defined American dreadnoughts for decades are completely torched away. Modern fire control radar antennas are hoisted onto newly fabricated tower superstructures. The broadside casemate guns, useless against aircraft, are stripped out. In their place, shipbuilders install advanced dual-purpose 5-inch gun turrets, banks of quad-mounted 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannons, and dozens of 20 millipence Oerlikon guns. The old dreadnoughts that the Japanese thought they had erased from history are being transformed into floating anti-aircraft fortresses, equipped with the most sophisticated, radar-directed gunnery systems on Earth. By the summer of 1942, while the war in the Pacific hangs in the balance at Midway and Guadalcanal, The hardest salvage job of all begins on the USS West Virginia. She had taken the worst punishment of any surviving ship. 7 torpedo hits and 2 armor-piercing bombs had blown her port side into pieces, causing her to sink directly onto the harbour bottom. Wallen's teams build massive patch sections weighing hundreds of tons each. Divers spend over 20,000 hours underwater in total across the entire operation, cutting through tangled debris with underwater oxyhydrogen torches and securing patches to the shattered hull. On June 9, 1942, the West Virginia is finally refloated and enters dry dock. Of the 8 battleships caught at Pearl Harbor, only 2 will never rise. The USS Arizona remains an underwater tomb for over 1,100 men, her structural integrity completely destroyed when her forward magazine exploded. The USS Oklahoma, rolled completely upside down in the mud, is eventually righted using an intricate system of electric winches and shore-based pulling towers. But the structural devastation is too severe, and she is decommissioned. The other 6, the Nevada, California, West Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, are all brought back from the dead. One by one, the resurrected Titans steam out of Pearl Harbor under their own power. They cross the Pacific to West Coast shipyards, most critically the Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington, where full modernization transforms them from pre-war relics into state-of-the-art warships before they return to the fleet. The Japanese High Command, having planned their entire oceanic strategy around the permanent destruction of the American battle line, has no idea that the very ships they claim to have destroyed are steaming directly toward their island strongholds. The revenge of the Ray's fleet begins in the waters of the Aleutians and sweeps south across the Pacific. In May 1943, the modernized USS Nevada provides devastating heavy bombardment during the liberation of Attu, her massive 14-inch guns obliterating Japanese bunker complexes. She then crosses into the Atlantic to participate in the Normandy landings, dropping shells directly on German coastal batteries on D-Day, and later supports Operation Dragoon in southern France. In the Pacific, the rebuilt battle line becomes the sledgehammer of the island-hopping campaign. The Tennessee, Maryland, and California unleash hundreds of thousands of tons of high-explosive ordnance, blasting through fortified coral caves at Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, and Tinian. Without the heavy armor and sustained firepower of these resurrected battleships, American amphibious assaults would have faced catastrophic casualty rates against heavily entrenched Japanese defenders. Then comes October 25, 1944, the Battle of Surigao Strait. The Japanese Southern Force, led by Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, steams through the narrow strait under the cover of night. Nishimura commands a powerful force, built around the battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, supported by heavy cruisers and destroyers. Their objective is to break into Leyte Gulf and massacre the vulnerable American landing transports ashore. Waiting for them at the northern end of the strait is Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, and commanding Oldendorf's battle line are 6 American battleships deployed in a perfect tactical formation, crossing the Japanese T. 5 of those 6 battleships, the West Virginia, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, were resting in the mud and burning at Pearl Harbor less than 3 years earlier. At 3:51 a.m., in pitch darkness, the radar on the USS West Virginia acquires the Japanese flagship Yamashiro at a range of nearly 23,000 yards. The Japanese optical rangefinders cannot see through the black night, but the West Virginia's cutting-edge fire control computers calculate the firing solution instantly. The order is given. The West Virginia's 16-inch guns roar into the darkness. 16 massive armor-piercing shells arc across the night sky. On the first salvo, the West Virginia scores a direct hit on the Yamashiro. Seconds later, the California and Tennessee open fire with radar-directed precision, unleashing an unstoppable wall of steel and high explosives. The sound of dozens of 14-inch and 16-inch guns firing simultaneously echoes across the strait like continuous rolling thunder. The shells slam into the Japanese ships with devastating accuracy, tearing through armor plating, detonating magazines, and turning the Japanese column into a blazing inferno. The Yamashiro is completely pulverized by concentrated fire from the very battleships Japan believed it had wiped out on December 7. The Japanese Southern Force is annihilated in the last battleship versus battleship duel in human history. The Pearl Harbor salvage operation was not just a triumph of engineering. It was one of the decisive strategic victories of World War II. By refusing to accept that sunken ships were lost ships, Captain Homer Wallin, his Navy salvage teams, and the civilian workers of Pacific Bridge Company and the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard pulled over 150,000 tons of heavy combat power from the harbor bottom and delivered the ultimate retribution against the fleet that had caught them unprepared.